When you look cool, you feel cool. Technology is revolutionizing every part of the business at a rapid pace, from robotics, AI and hair care, animation, coding, and now AI and fashion design. As quoted by Virgil Abloh, I grew up feeling that design wasn't for me because I didn't see anyone that looked like me in design. Welcome back to another Cutting Edge episode. I'm your host, Terrence. But before we go on this creative journey, make sure you hit the like button, drop some comments, and subscribe to the BlerdOut movement.
Confidence, yeah. It really shouldn't be no arguments, cause you're now viewing the greatest of all time, saying I can't get better, I promise.
With over 20 years working in the fashion industry as a designer, CAD 3D artist, and product manager, Mikelle Pellum began educating upcoming fashion designers as well as renowned fashion school fit. As a fashion entrepreneur, her mission is to intersect and transform cutting-edge digital tools and technology to guide other fashion entrepreneurs and design concepts to reality. Welcome to the show, Mikelle.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So let's get right into it. You've been in the fashion industry quite a while. Can you kind of walk us through your journey and what it's been like for you and how you got started?
Yeah, so I was thinking about this yesterday. By the end of the month, it will be exactly 24 years, 24, 25.
You've been doing it a while.
I guess I haven't thought about it as much as I thought. Maybe 27 years. But I graduated in 97, literally like on a Sunday, and that Monday I started working.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, like and haven't stopped since. So anybody who is working and is graduating and is getting a job right after and starting to work in the industry, don't do that. Like at least take a few days off, because I was like, okay, I want to capitalize on the momentum, and it was a little too much. But anyway, so I started working right away, and I have spent the majority of my time as a designer. And then I sort of moved into product development, and then eventually I'm still doing some product development, but mostly teaching and training at this point. And it's been really fun. I started as an activewear designer. I still love activewear. I've been able to touch other things since then, but my heart is still in activewear. Okay. And I actually started working on the computer at my first job, and just kind of started and haven't left. It was one of those things that you didn't realize that you really liked. But once I realized it, I was like, oh, this is my thing now.
I love that. I appreciate you sharing, getting us started with that. So I have a little girl, and she loves fashion, right? And so she just kind of draws pictures, and I'm not that dad, so it's kind of like, all right, so I want to tell our audience, like, where'd you gain your inspiration for this industry, right? You're doing very well in it, but what inspired you? And now you've been using CAD. Like, I use CAD for something completely different and never thought to use CAD in the fashion industry. You mind sharing some of that?
Yeah, well, in activewear, and I want you to just keep in mind, there's like really high fashion where you're inspired by the world, and you just took a trip to Brazil, and just things like that. Yeah. For the majority of the fashion industry, we are creating fashion, but a lot of us are also creating clothing, meaning you're creating things that could be fashionable, could be trendier, but they are a little more practical and not so much like I'm wearing it to the Oscars, or I'm wearing it to, some art studio or art outing opening or something like that. Like, you're wearing more everyday things. Right. And so because of that, the inspiration was, we would go to museums, and we would look in fashion magazines, and we would look at the runway, but we were also looking at our competitors. And for us, that was like, a Nike and a Puma and an Adidas. And later on, as more people started doing, sorry, I keep thinking I have cat hair on my face. As activewear has started making more of its way onto the runway, then it would be, some more high fashion Montclair and some other higher fashion companies. But it did come from everywhere, but a lot of it was competitors.
Mm-hmm.
And so we spent a lot of time like just going into stores and seeing what's in the store, seeing what other people are actually buying. And Nike was actually pretty good because although they do create things that you and I buy all the time,
Sure.
they did have an aspect of it that was a little more aspirational. And so there were things there that, we couldn't afford to do,
Right.
but it was interesting to look at it and see the construction and see how they did it and then try to translate that into something that was more affordable and more understandable for our customer who was a few tiers lower than a Nike.
Yeah, right, yeah. Okay, and then there's quite a few of those companies out there. I know one that I've been kind of keeping an eye on is like Active Black. And so they make that.
Yep.
Okay, so I'm familiar with what you're talking about. So I'm a robotics engineer, right? And so my next
Nice.
question kind of guides into like, do you see this industry being impacted by robotics, and will there come a day where maybe robots are doing more of the sewing of the garments versus, individuals? And if so, will that, like oftentimes robotics doesn't really impact jobs, it creates more jobs, but for the fashion industry, do you see that happening?
Maybe.
Okay.
Um, but I feel like it might be a long way off. And here's the reason why. I was actually looking into that because I made a joke just Friday in my class about how humans are still sewing garments.
Mm-hmm.
The reason that robots are not sewing garments is because they can't get the robots to grasp the fabric very well, like it's too slinky and too, like they need something a little more hard and concrete and definite.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And fabric is not that.
Right.
So they can't get oh crap. Can you hear my cat?
You okay?
Okay. My husband walked out the door, and every time he walks out the door, the cat is like, "Where did you go?" And I'm like, "He's coming back." Anyway, he'll stop in a second. But anyway, so that's the whole thing, is that like they actually do have like a beta test or like a first robot
Mm-hmm.
that they're trying to test out and get them to sew garments. And what they're doing is they're kind of applying something to the fabric to, I guess, make it a little stiffer.
Yep, right.
So that the robot can actually grasp it and sew.
Yeah.
So there's quite a few. I don't know how many people are going to go for something like that. And there's so many other fabrics that I don't know if they'd be able to apply something like this to it because of the nature of the fabric.
Mm-hmm.
So having robots sew garments is a very long way off.
Yeah.
The other part of that is that as much as fashion is very trendy and tries to stay up on what's happening next, they are very, very, very slow to adapt technology.
Okay, very good.
So again, it's when AI was like becoming more of an impact on fashion, which is still sort of like it's just dipping its toe in it,
Yeah.
but it was a conversation that was happening a lot more on LinkedIn. And there were a lot of designers that were like, "Oh my God, it's going to take my job." Blah, blah.
Right.
And I'm like, don't worry.
Okay.
Like that if that happens, that's not going to happen for a while.
Right. Yeah, no, I'm glad you mentioned that because I get into those conversations all the time where everybody's just in a panic. Like, oh, what's going to happen? And, what's this going to look like? And do I have to worry about losing my job? And you're right. Like, there's some things that while they're talking about it, some things just aren't going to work out very well.
Right,
especially
right.
high-end fashion, right, where it's kind of like a one-off. There's not going to be many of them.
Exactly.
It's the same way
Exactly.
with certain cars where if they're only going to make 500 of them, it doesn't even make sense to automate it, right? But,
Right.
if you're going to be making hundreds of thousands of them, then you're like, okay, well, there's millions of these. We can repeat the process. What about this? I got one other question or one other technology for that, like 3D printing, right? So the idea of 3D printing fabric, has anyone attempted that? Or do you know?
Yes, actually. A few years ago, I saw this designer in Israel, and she was a student, and she had done her whole like master's thesis, I believe it was, and she had 3D printed all of the fabric for all of her garments. Um, the thing about 3D printing is that it takes a while to actually print out what you need. It's not at the point where it's really scalable for a larger company. Also, right now, from what I've seen of 3D printing fabric, it has like this very distinct like lattice look to it, and you know, you don't want all your garments to look like that. Like they haven't mastered being able to really create different types of fabrics. So it kind of has a very, I won't say one dimensional, but it looks a certain way, and so all of your fabric looks that way, and that's just long term, that's just not going to work, you know. So it's cool. It's interesting to talk about. As far as 3D printing, what I have seen is people using 3D printing in accessories, mostly footwear, where they are 3D printing the soles of shoes and then, you know, attaching the upper to it.
Okay. Yep.
So that's been interesting because what they have been trying to do, footwear in particular, is not very sustainable. All of the components, most of the components are not biodegradable. They're just things that just get thrown in the trash. And so I think one of the sustainability initiatives for footwear in the past few years has been to try and find ways to make it more sustainable. And one of them has been, can we 3D print the sole, so that that's one less thing that we're adding to pollution.
Got it. Right. I get it. And you mentioned one of your students, like, so you currently train, you know, aspiring designers today, right? Through your classes and your online training, 383 Design Studios. Can you kind of tell us a little more about that? What inspired you to create that?
Yes. So I have online classes and live online classes. And for people who are actually in the New York area, sometimes I teach in-person group classes. That's actually how it started. And they're all centered around digital and CAD. So for us, CAD is a much broader topic, where it really is computer aided design. So it can include Illustrator, Photoshop, Procreate, Clo, Browseware, all of those things, that all those tools that we use. And so the ones that I focus on are Illustrator. Sometimes I'll do Photoshop, not as a group class, but I'll privately train people. Clo. And then I also have a class on tech packs. And right now we also have a merchandising class. And I also teach at FIT, and it's very similar things. Illustrator, Photoshop, PLM, which is product lifecycle management. It's more of a tool that you use after you've designed everything, and then you want to create your tech pack and communicate with the vendors. And then what's the other thing I teach there? I think that's it. I have a variety of classes that kind of mix those other things, those components in there.
No, I love that. You know, it's interesting because all of the softwares you just named, I use them in manufacturing, right? And I would have never known that they were used in fashion. How do you use that? And you know, it's interesting because the companies who create that software, you know, you don't know, right? You know, you see CAD and auto, you know, for construction and structural design, you know, manufacturing and layouts for fashion. I'm like, well, how do they do that? I've never seen that feature when I'm playing around with the software.
And, you know, it's interesting because one of the reasons that this all started was because people would look online. And so probably like early 2000s, more people started using the computer for fashion design. Well, most people weren't doing that, right? And fortunately, my first job in activewear, that was like one of the first places where they started to use Illustrator. It just lent itself well. Like the bodies are not that complicated. There's a lot of graphic prints and things like that. So it was a category that lent itself well to being shown on as a flat sketch on Illustrator. So I was, by the time I had gotten like 5 years in, I would say 5 to 8 years in, it was starting to really catch on in fashion. And by then I had been using it for so long and I was like, okay, I know what I'm doing, you know? And so I would, when I left and went to other companies, there were a lot of designers who really did not understand how to use Illustrator because they had never had to use it. So I kind of became the go-to person to ask. And then, you know, this was the start of people looking online and trying to find classes. And anytime they would look up CAD, that's what they would find. They would find like engineering things or like architects. Right. They would never find anything for fashion. And so I was like, okay, well, I know how to do this, you know? And so maybe I'll try making a class. And I had a friend, I actually had an intern who interned for me. He had studied in Milan and he had had all these wonderful internships. And he was like, Mikelle, I can't find a job because I don't know how to use Illustrator. So he's like, okay, what if I like buy you dinner one night and you just spend a couple of hours with me teaching me how to use Illustrator? Fine. So he comes over and we spent about 2 hours and he's like, I paid for like a $2,000 class. It was 8 weeks. I've learned more in these 2 hours than I've learned in that entire class. Oh, yeah. And he's like, you should start like making classes, like doing classes in this. And I was like, maybe I will. That was kind of how it started. That was how it started. And it was really popular. And then all of a sudden, you know, everybody and their mother were trying to like do these classes. Of course. But it was fine because a lot of the people that were doing it were people who didn't really understand the nuances of fashion. And so I'm in it. I'm doing it every day because I was still, you know, working my regular job and then I was teaching at night. And so my edge for a lot of people was that I'm in it. I understand how to do a flat sketch. And if you look at someone who is in fashion and doing a flat sketch, and then you look at like a graphic designer doing a flat sketch, you can look at right away and tell, okay, I'm going to go to her class. Right. She actually knows what she's doing. And, you know, I mean, flat sketches can be a little stiff and boardy, but someone who has been doing it and can kind of give it a little more life, you know, and breathe into it and make it look a little prettier, which is what all of us designers really want. Yeah. You know, we want a pretty looking thing. You just notice the differences there. And so that helped me along a lot, you know, in the beginning.
Got it. You mentioned a software or maybe, you know, that I'm not as familiar with, but tech packs. You mind diving a little bit deeper into that and what's the efficiencies of it?
Yeah, so tech packs are actually not a software. It is a document. And it's a very, very important document for all of fashion designers. Every fashion designer, even if you're not the one that is typing in the information, I believe every single fashion designer needs to know how to make a tech pack and at the very least just understand what's in it. So you have this design, you've drawn it, but you have to tell someone how to make it. You know, you're not just giving somebody a sketch and saying, here, make this. You know, they're going to ask you, well, what is it made out of? What color is it? How big is this side panel? How many buttons do you want? You know, what's that detail in there? You know, and so the tech pack is what tells the person who's making it all of those things. So not only is there a front and a back sketch on there, but then there's detail pages where you might like blow up things and say, hey, this is a flat felled seam, or the fit looks like this. This is a waterproof zipper, and then you have a spec sheet where you're actually giving measurements of the garment. Because I'm sure you're familiar with this. And if you're not, a woman, because it usually happens much more with women, where you go visit 5 different stores, you wear a size 12, and in every single store it fits differently.
Yeah.
And it's because there's no standardization. There's somewhat, but a size 12 fits differently for every single person in every single brand. So you have to say what it is for your brand. What does that look like? What is the chest width for your brand? What is the waist for your brand? And then it might even be a little bit different for that particular design. You might be, trying something different. Yeah. And then you need a page for the materials. So what fabric is it? Where's the fabric come from? What's the fiber content? Where, if I'm sending this to somebody and I'm saying, here, you need to order this fabric, well, where do I order it from? How much is it? So all of that information has to go into the tech pack, so that it's like the instruction manual for how to create this style. So you can give that to somebody, and then there'll probably still be, a question or two here and there, but you want to make sure that it is as complete as possible, so that when they send you back this physical sample of this sketch that you made, that it is as perfect as it can be when you put it on and you're like, oh, this feels great, this looks great, and you might take in here and there, but it should be damn near perfect if it's a good tech pack.
Yeah, you brought up something really important that made me think about something. Like, a lot of the clothes that people are wearing, come from other countries, right? And I remember a time where clothes, would be made a certain way, and then let's say Black women or men wore them and say, this is not fit to our bodies, right? Or even the mannequins, like, I like that outfit, but the mannequin doesn't look like me. Like, how are you able to address those kind of concerns as it relates to the Black community?
Well, it's one of the reasons why I am encouraging people to use 3D, because you can create an avatar that is a replica of your measurements. And if you are let's say you're establishing your own brand, then you can say, okay, well, we're going to fit it for this particular body type, and we're going to have measurements that fit these particular body types. And here's the thing, every brand could adjust their measurements so that it fits somebody who's hippier this way, right, a little bit more bootylicious than hippier this way. Right. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So some of that is, the brand just there. It's funny because we just had this conversation on Friday. That brand has an idea of who their customer is. It might not be you. And so I always tell people, okay, so there's other people out there who want you as their customer. Right. They will fit your body type. You should go over there. Instead of trying to keep giving your money to these people who really are not as concerned and Agreed. Have these poorly fitting garments that clearly are not addressing you.
Agreed.
And if you are a designer and you're starting that brand and you're saying, well, this is who I want to serve, you have options. Like, you don't have to go by industry standards, especially now. You can establish what that looks like so that it does fit a different body type.
Love it. And with your students, like, when you're doing your classes, like, what have been some of the more challenging situations that you've been in, either as an instructor, or the challenges that your students are facing in coming into the fashion industry?
Challenging how?
Say challenging, just, getting the skill sets they need for the industry, or even using the software that you're kind of training them up on. Like, CAD is something that, not everybody does, even in my industry. Like I'm not a CAD designer. I know how to use
Yeah.
it, but when you start using it for fashion, like you're a pioneer in using this software for the industry. What has that experience been like for you and your students?
The biggest challenge has been my students just getting over, well, two things actually. One, the fear of technology, because literally it's like people feel like, remember how like in the beginning, and sometimes it still happens with like our parents, where people like touch a button and they feel like they're going to blow up the computer. And I'm like, yo, you're not, you're
Right.
not. There's always Control Z.
Yep.
So if you do something wrong, just Control Z before you go too far, But like people are literally afraid to tap a key. And I'm like, just tap it. It's okay. The other part of it, particularly for artists, is that they are very, very much in tune with the tactility of it, meaning feeling fabrics, drawing with a pencil. I remember going on an interview years ago with this girl who was assembling a team or hiring a team, and I was going to be one of the people on her team. And I asked her, well, do you use a computer? And she says, no. And that was her whole thing. She was like, I just really feel very much in touch with pencil and paper. So I don't use the computer. And I've met so many other students who feel the same way. Like they really just want to draw with a pencil or color with markers or color pencils, And yeah, I mean, once you get on the computer, a lot of that is taken away. Yeah. And so part of it is just them getting past, I don't have that anymore.
Yeah.
Once I can get them past that and make them understand that, there are programs that will allow you to freehand sketch and color and do other things, then they're like, oh, this is fun. And I'm like, yeah, that's what I've been trying to tell y'all. Right. But it's really just getting them past that and the thought that I'm not going to be able to touch and feel anymore, But then once they get past that part, I'm not saying that everybody falls in love with it, but they definitely can see the value in it. And I have plenty of students who are just like, I like doing this. I don't draw with pencil and paper. Like there's one program called Procreate that I am not a fan of, but most of my students are, so I don't just discount it. But most of them now are digitally drawing and sketching in Procreate, and it allows you to just freehand draw, unlike Illustrator, which is one of the hangups that people have with Illustrator is that, it's the pen tool and you're click and click and click and click and click, but with Procreate and even Photoshop, you can pick up a stylus and you can just draw very freely. And that's what a lot of them really want.
Love it. Yeah, no, I was just gonna, point to like Procreate. I just downloaded recently. Not for me, I'm a terrible drawer, but for my daughter, and I thought it was really cool. I do know some graphic designers who use it. And it's amazing. You also mentioned Illustrator. Are there any other software apps that you would encourage fashion designers or aspiring fashion designers who are having that challenge of transitioning from pencil and paper to the digital and using a digital pen to, are there any other apps out there?
Well, for freehand drawing, I usually suggest either Procreate or Adobe's answer to Procreate. They're what would be the equivalent of Procreate in Adobe is Fresco.
Oh, okay. Haven't heard
which
that.
only works on iPad. Or if you want to freely go back and forth between iPad and desktop, I would suggest Photoshop.
Okay. Now, so I appreciate that because I'm probably going to go download Fresco. I like just trying things, right? But again, I cannot draw. Some of the fashion designs are very avant-garde-ish. Like, polos, shorts, different garments that are, made of cotton, really straightforward designs. Like, what are some of the examples of the 3D CAD technologies that you're using to revolutionize new designs, like such as the activewear that you've been working on?
So 3D software, the one that I use the most is Clo 3D. Mm-hmm. And I think it's cool. And I also feel like that's the one that has the least learning curve. Okay. It's similar, not exactly the same, but it's similar to Illustrator. So if you're someone who has been using Illustrator, the transition is not as crazy. There's still a little bit of a transition because thinking in 2D versus 3D is a very, it's like, it's like twisting your brain, taking your brain out, twisting it, and then putting it back in. But you eventually get used to it and then it becomes fun, There's also another one called Browseware, which is not quite, there's a little bit more of a learning curve. But I believe that if you are going to be using 3D for creating patterns to then put into production, I think it's the better tool of the two. Those are the two that you will see the most within the industry. For independent designers, most independent designers are using Clo 3D. I think just because it's more accessible and quite honestly, it's a little sexier than Browseware. Okay. And then there's also another one called Style 3D, which is very similar to Clo. But from what I remember, I haven't played with it in a long time. I saw a demo of it a few years ago. But the only issue I have with Style 3D is that they're not as, and this may have changed, but at the time that I saw it, they weren't necessarily as interested in creating physical garments. So there's a whole community of people who are just creating garments for the digital world. And that's where they live. And not just for things like skins for gaming.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I got you.
But like literally they there are plenty of people who like go online and they go into these like digital world and the metaverse, right? Yeah, right. And that's kind of like where they live their lives, a lot of their lives. And so there are people who are creating these garments just for that, Most of the people that I'm working with, they're creating it in 3D, but they eventually want to create a physical garment. And so Clo or Browseware is better for that.
Got it. Okay. That's I completely forgot that there would be a digital design of, like for skins or clothing on a video game. Like my novice self would just say, oh, well, the clothing goes right with the design of the character, right? Right. It just, it all goes as one thing. Like, what have you seen in the industry for those who just do it digitally for gaming and skins for, some of the applications out there versus like which one is influencing the other? Like, do you believe that the physical garments are influencing the design of digital, or is digital now influencing the physical garments that are coming out?
They're kind of two different paths. Okay. For those that are creating something from digital from a physical, it's usually a brand that has decided that they want to do some kind of collab with someone. Yeah. And it's a little of both, actually, because like there were some, like I was just recently researching, Tommy Hilfiger had created a collection, and Polo actually did this recently too, where it was in some game, I can't remember which game it was, but then they also made some of those things available as like limited editions, physical garments that you could also buy. And of course, they were very expensive, but you could also buy them outside of the game if you felt like you wanted to, wear it. But and so most of those higher end companies that are kind of doing it more for like the marketing part of it, they do have both. But other than that, a lot of people are like, the digital is strictly digital, and it's a whole other world, a whole nother workflow, a whole nother thought process. And part of that is because, you know, if it's not being made in the real world, you don't have to worry about certain things, you know, like making sure that you can actually get in and get out of it. You know, how many times have I said to my students, how are you getting into that? You know, like, and so you can just like create things to your heart's content. You can have somebody wearing liquid gold, you know, or things that would never exist in the physical world.
Correct.
You know, so it's a different thought process if you're just creating for digital. And so it tends to kind of be its own lane, and then people who create physical, and people who are creating for the digital world tend to just create for the digital world because of that.
Are you having any challenges bridging the gap between the digital and the more practical pastime tools that have been used, and if so, how are you addressing that in your classes?
Not really, not yet, because most of my students, and even my students who are part of 3D3 Design Studio, they're not really thinking about that. You know, personally, I don't see as many fashion designers who are really that interested in creating garments for the digital world. You know, like they want to see somebody on the street wearing their clothes, you know. And I think the digital designers, or people who are creating digital fashion for digital designers, a lot of them are, and this is complete generalization, it's just my opinion, but I think that a lot of them are not necessarily coming directly from the fashion world. I think they are but I think they are coming from gaming and digital design, and just think that it's a cool thing to create something. So it's not really something that I've had to really address, because no one's really brought it up. You know, no one's really that interested. I'm not really that interested, to be quite honest with you. Because again, it's the same thing. Like, if I'm going to spend the time to design something, I want to see somebody wear it. You know, and I'm not interested in gaming really at all, or like exploring the metaverse, you know, so it's just not really a thing.
Yeah. Would that work the same, like for the companies, you mentioned companies that do both, right? Where it's actual a real garment and they have the digital piece. But for some companies, you know, they have it like where it's try it before you buy it kind of digital tools, right? And so it has the real garment, and then they're able to kind of contour it to your body digitally, and then, you know, making the decision easier for you to go buy it. Like, can you kind of talk to that? And is that like real? Like, does it really work well?
It's still kind of a newer technology, but what they're doing, and I actually, if they can get this to work, I think it'll be huge. But what they're trying to do is to get people to create an avatar of themselves, and then digitize the garments so that you can upload this avatar of yourself. And then, like, if you're shopping online, you see something and you want to try it on and see what it looks like on you, then you can, you know, click on that thing and it loads it onto your avatar, and then you can see how it looks on you, how it fits on you with your curves based on what the actual proportions are of this particular item. You know, like what we were talking about earlier, like if it's not cut for someone who is, you know, is slightly more well endowed, you know, you'll see that on the avatar before you buy it, and then you can realize, oh, okay, this is not going to work, this really doesn't fit. And you can move on, as opposed to you buy it, you get it, you try it on, it fits like crap, and then you got to go, you know, send it back.
It had me just thinking about some of the memes that I've seen. Like, this is what I thought I bought, and this is how it actually looked on me.
Right. So like, trying to cut down on that, and it's good for the company too, because returns are very, very expensive for a lot of companies, you know, because you can't always just restock it. If you have something like Nordstrom, who has Nordstrom Rack to send a lot of those returns to, it might not be as big of a deal. But technically, like once somebody's bought it and used it and opened it, you can't just put it back on the floor.
Right. Sure.
You know, so now you've got all this excess inventory that people have returned that you're like, okay, what are we going to do with this? You know? And so in theory, if they can get this to work, this should be good. This should be a win-win for everybody.
Yeah, love it. Okay, thank you for sharing that and kind of expanding on that explanation. I appreciate that. So we all know that collaboration is the key to fostering good relationships and growing and scaling a business. Like, how are you fostering collaboration with designers, illustrators, technologists, and others to kind of help expand not only your program but influencing the fashion industry?
Well, the first thing that I've been doing is I have a fashion business competition. It's called From Pencil to Production. And what I've been doing is collaborating with some of the other judges to introduce other online courses that make sense with what we talk about in that competition. So the first course that I'm collaborating on is for merchandising. And so we have a merchandising course. We're also hoping to add like a marketing course, one on funding, which is a big deal. Eventually, I would love to add pattern making, which is always kind of a tough one because, you know, learning pattern making online when what you really want to do is, you know, be in the class with the person and seeing what they're doing. But we're going to try it. So that's part of what I'm building towards, and trying to find ways to make all of this more accessible, which is what an online class does for more people, but also not just like, you know, here's a class and I'm talking on, you know, Zoom or whatever, and that it's not as interactive and not as I don't know what the word is. Like, I've seen some of like pattern making classes, and you really want to like see what the person is doing, you know, and it's just not shot well. It's not, you know, like it's just so much about it that's just not good. Yeah. So I'm trying to elevate that part of it, which hopefully I'm also collaborating with my husband, who's a filmmaker, to help do that, so that when we do introduce that part of it, someone who decides, I don't have the money to pay to go to FIT or Parsons or Pratt, but I can take this online course and it has all of the elements that I need. It not only gives me the information, but I do feel like I'm interacting with someone. I love all the videos because they do feel like I'm right there and I'm watching what it is. And I can graduate from that course, not be in debt, you know, and feel like I can now go off into the world and either get a job in fashion or start my fashion business.
There you go. All right, that's amazing. And with all your experience, I mean, your wealth of knowledge is really expansive. I'm learning a lot here just talking to you. What advice or, you know, do you have for the young and aspiring fashion designers out there, you know, technologists and illustrators who want to get into the industry and you know, or even join the, you know, one of your classes at 383 Design Studio?
Say just be open to the technology. Understand that the technology doesn't have to replace the tactile part of it, because I had to start explaining that to my students, and realizing that there's a real, you know, amongst them, there's a real fear that they're never going to be able to pick up a pencil again and draw on paper. And I'm like, no, are you kidding me? I draw all the time, So understand that it's melding the two and have fun with it. I mean, if we're not having fun, what are we doing?
Yeah.
So make sure that you're still finding the fun in everything that you're doing. And, just embrace the technology and just keep learning about what's new, because particularly now after COVID, all of a sudden fashion now they're still slow, but it's sped up what they are starting to adopt. And so by the time, if they're really young, by the time that they are ready to go into college and, or if they decide not to go to college, like to move on and try to establish their own brand, there's going to be a lot of technology. Mm-hmm. So just get used to embracing it and having fun with it.
Love it. What are some of the trends that you foresee in the future happening in the fashion industry that you can kind of hip us to? And, what are you working on that's in your lane of work?
The main thing I'm focused on right now is helping other companies figure out how to use the 3D software so that it fits into their workflow. Mm-hmm. Because there's a lot of things that it can do for companies and even, small fashion brands that will help streamline the process, that will help make you more sustainable. Sustainability is a huge thing. Yeah. And also, just help you save some money, especially when you're a small designer. Like, most of us don't have deep pockets, mm-hmm. And it takes quite a bit of money to really launch a fashion brand well. Yeah. So using that technology and just trying to help people understand, well, maybe you can use it here. You don't have to use it in every single step. You can, but you don't have to. And just, adding it where it makes sense so that all of a sudden it takes away, you having to do this one more thing. I mean, when you're an entrepreneur, you wear a bazillion hats. And if you can take off even one of those hats, mm-hmm. That's a win, where you can get some more of your time back to do something else or take care of that other thing that you've been trying to get to for weeks. Yeah. So the main thing that I've been focused on right now is just trying to get others to understand what 3D can do for them and how it can help improve their lives, how it can help improve their businesses, how it can help make them more money, or at the very least, keep more money in their pocket. And, also understanding that you don't have to glob onto every single thing that comes out. Yeah. But, play with it, but it might not be for you, and just embrace the things that are going to actually help move the needle on what you're doing.
Thank you. Yep. I appreciate that. You mind telling our audience and our future fashion designers where they could find you and more information about your design studio?
Yes, for sure. So you can find me on Instagram. I'm on LinkedIn a lot, but that's not as cute. So you can find me on Instagram. I'm on 383 Design is my handle on Instagram. I'm also on YouTube. You can find me on YouTube. I have lots of fun videos on YouTube. Excellent. Also at 383 Design. And if you want to go to my website, it's 383designstudionyc.com.
All right. Thank you for that. So we appreciate you doing that. And thank you for Mikelle for joining the BlerdOut podcast today. This has been a very good conversation. I've learned a lot, and I'm sure our listeners have as well. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. It was so much fun.
Confidence, yeah. It really shouldn't be no arguments, 'cause you're now viewing the greatest of all time.